consider what actually happened. And, I don't think it's part of the scope of this interview to really go into that. It's kind of irrelevant to what you're about, but it is important to, that's like the easiest question anyone can ask. I actually had an experience earlier this week. I have a sticker on my car that says 9/11 is an inside job. I was driving to work, and this person behind me I could see was flicking me off in my rearview mirror. And it wasn't just like a quick little flick or anything. They were holding it there, and they actually pulled both fingers out, and they were holding it there for enough time for me to call my fiance and get her voicemail and get through her entire message. And then he goes to the side of my car and looked me right in the eyes and flicked me off. And he actually happened to be going the same direction that I was going to work. So I more or less followed him until we got to a stoplight where I was next to him. And I told him to roll down his window. And I asked him about it. I said, were you flicking me off? And he said, don't worry about it. And I said, no. Like, you definitely flicked me off, and I just want to talk about it. Like, why? What's the problem? And he's like, nice bumper sticker. And I said, I have 4 of them. Which one? And he said, well, listen, man, my cousin died in 9/11. And I said, well, my bumper sticker has nothing to do with your cousin. There's no disrespect meant. In fact, you should honor your cousin by asking some questions about it. I have a lot of questions myself. And this guy just said, have a nice day, and rolled up his window. And I said, no. Like, roll down your window again. Don't you know about Building 7? And he said, of course, I'm from Hoboken, New Jersey. I know about that. Why don't you just have a nice day, and rolled up his window. And I guess my point is, there's still this atmosphere out there that is causing people not to want to question things. When 9/11, there's so many questions to be asked, and the thing is, and I'm sure you know this, that when you pose those questions to people, it is painful for them to go from that point to where you have gone, where you're positioning on your site that all citizens are slaves, that we're all actually bonded to debt. So could you go in that direction and talk about how you discovered that, when we're born, basically, we're monetized by the state and traded on the international markets?
Well, I seen a very funny Facebook meme picture, and there's a picture of this redneck guy, and he has an American flag T-shirt, and the picture reads, I have freedom, and I have all the licenses to prove it.
Right.
A lot of patriotic Americans, they like to brag that, America is the most free and prosperous place on earth. And, perhaps, there is some truth to that. People are allowed to get away with things, but that's where I have the problem, is that you're not really free if you have to ask for permission. We have the nicest slave owners on earth. Well, that may be true, but you're still a slave. So after I started having these, driver's license problems and getting all these traffic tickets, it can be very depressing, and it can be very disheartening because, I get tired of, fighting these things, and I'm not gonna lie, sometimes I just throw them some money, and I'm like, hey, I don't even feel like going to court this week. I've already been enough. I'm tired of going to this place. Sometimes you just cut your losses. But whenever I first started going to court and fighting all this stuff, I was just sitting there in the pews, and I was just thinking to myself, I was like, man, we really need a license for everything. And speaking of which, during the Ron Paul campaign, I'd actually got stopped by a police officer for protesting one of the Federal Reserve buildings here in Nashville, and he told me that I needed a permit to protest.
Wow.
And my father, about 2 years ago, he was detained for fishing without a license. And then so I really just started to remember these events. And then the final straw that broke the camel's back, there was a kid on my street whom I teach boxing to, and his mother, or grandmother, I'm sorry, she was detained because she refused to shut down his cupcake and lemonade stand. The police came out and said, "Hey, you don't have a business license. So everything needs a license." So from that point, I was like, where do these licenses come from, and where do they get this so-called jurisdiction or permission? Where does all this stem from? Why do they think they have this control over me? So you go back to the source. Whenever you're born, what do they give you? They give you a birth certificate. Before, whenever you were born, you just you wrote your name in the back of a Bible, or you just wrote your name on a family document, and then you kept it for yourself. But now they want to register you. Anytime that you're asked to be registered, there's a reason. They want you to be tracked, and they want to be able to issue privileges. And people may think that that's a good thing, but the moment that you register yourself, you're entering into a contract, and with that contract, sure, there may be some benefits, but anytime that you enter into a contract, there's terms and conditions, which means if you violate those terms and conditions, you are subject to certain things. And then, that was the key moment. Subject. What is subject? A subject is someone that is under the will of another. We are subjects, and we are subject to certain terms and agreements. So that birth certificate, the moment that you sign that and you get that over to your child, you are property of whatever government that they're claiming that you're under. And I started looking into this a little bit further. I'm like, so the birth certificate is what gives credence to all these licenses, these social security numbers. It's basically the root document. And I started looking into these birth certificates, and I just got really curious and said, I wonder if these things, have more, tracking information than what they're letting on. Because I noticed that there's all these numbers and there's all these symbols all over the birth certificate. So I started doing some research, and I went to the county registrar, and I went to all these places, and then I soon discovered that these numbers were actually cuff-up numbers, similar to what's used in a bank, and they were actually routing numbers, and a lot of these birth certificates are actually being held inside of federal banks. And even if you look on a birth certificate, it has the word note written on there. I mean, legally, what is a note? A note has to do with commerce, and to me, being born should not be linked to any form of commerce. If being born and commerce are being used in the same sentence, then that makes me start to think of slavery. Like, I'm being passed around like a dollar bill. My name is on a piece of paper. My name is being registered, and it's being passed around into these federal banks. So I started doing some more and more digging, and I started to put two and two together. I mean, think about it. If the federal government is trying to get a loan from, let's say, China or Russia or any other country, how do these other countries know that the United States government is going to pay this back? Well, I have 300 million birth certificates right here, and all these people are paying taxes, and a few more million are going to be born this year, and then whenever they reach 18, they're going to start paying taxes too, and they're going to get licenses, and they're going to do this and this and this. And then I started just doing more and more research, and come to find out, I mean, this stuff it goes way, way back. I mean, I could talk about this for hours. I mean, it goes all the way back to the Queen of England. I mean, it goes so far back. And the earlier you mentioned the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. The IMF is basically the father of the stepfather of the Federal Reserve System. The Federal Reserve System, a lot of people know about it. It's pretty common knowledge now. The Federal Reserve System once enslaved Americans, but through the IMF, they was like, how can we take this Federal Reserve System and implant it on a global scale while we have all these birth certificates and these income taxes that are propping it up and fueling it? So for every birth certificate that is printed out. It's basically giving the United States government more credit on your name. And guess what? When the government borrows money on your name, guess who has to pay the interest? Not the government, you do. Anything that the government needs, they charge it to your name, and they get to sit at their fancy desk and just sign papers while you go to your job and you do manual labor. They really have a very cushy position, and I find it very sickening.
It's amazing, and it's hard to reckon with, isn't it? Just hearing the information. I'm sure for most people it may be the first time that they've ever heard that, and it's painful, to confront. So where's this going? I mean, your site has on the top of it, rendering the government obsolete through philosophy, logic, and technology. Obviously, the government is a huge part of the problem, but you're alluding to the Federal Reserve and the IMF, so the money system is contributing hugely to the issue. I mean, they're kind of inextricably linked. So,
right.
You know, you describe yourself as an anarchist. So, I mean, and also an optimist. So, where do you think it's going, and where are you in that journey?
Well, you know, the term anarchist is it's very broad. You know, you have anarcho-capitalists, anarcho-socialists. You know, there's many different umbrella terms. I like to classify myself really as a voluntarist, because it really gets down to the heart of the matter. And a voluntarist is someone that believes that all interactions, whether they be personal or economic, should be voluntary and free of racketeering. It should be free of coercion. So if the government wants to exist, if the state of Tennessee wants to exist, if the federal government wants to exist, that's totally fine. All I ask is that we be allowed to compete with those services, but they're never going to let that happen. The government is basically, you know, I don't even call them the government anymore. I call them a business. They're a corporation.
Right.
They're a mafia. So as far as that slogan, rendering the government obsolete through logic, philosophy, and technology, I basically see that happening through decentralization and technology. You know, people are starting to practice, forms of anarchism and localization, whether they realize it or not. People are getting more community-oriented. People are starting to realize that, hey, having one company or one business or one government that's just, you know, running everything is maybe not the most accountable way to run things. Maybe we should let everyone in on this business and let the best products succeed. Case in point, we have, mountain hours, and we have these local currencies that are popping up. As long as you don't call it a dollar, it's technically not counterfeit. You know, so people are making their own forms of money, and they're opting out of using these Federal Reserve notes. Some people call them dollars. The dollars haven't existed for a long time. They're Federal Reserve notes. And through technology, I mean, what's going to happen when technology reaches a point to where we have these 3D printers that can print, you know, food, or we have these devices that can protect us from physical attacks? I mean, UPS and FedEx and other forms of technology are already starting to make certain government services, largely obsolete. And then Bitcoin is starting to grow, and local community police forces are starting to become more and more popular. People are starting to take more accountability. People are starting to localize things, and people are starting to realize that, hey, the only person that's going to make this world a better place, it has to start with me, and then it has to start with my community. And I can't just, go to the voting booth and then just trust a few hundred men to just handle the affairs of millions of people. If I, as an individual, cannot be trusted to govern myself, then why in the hell should 400 men be trusted to govern 400 million people in this so-called country? So my goal is, you know what? We don't have to overthrow the government. We don't have to use violence.